Hey everyone, it's been a while since I've done a video like this, and I think this one's going to be a fun one. Going to have lots of audio demonstrations, and I want some discussion in the comments, so kick back, hang out, and let's go on a fun little sonic journey together. I was inspired to make this video by some rather spirited discussions I had with some classmates recently at the new job. It got sparked up after we finished a really cool class on some cool amplifiers. What I'm about to talk about is a subject of much contention in the guitar community. At the peak of this boomers on forums level mountain are players who have the belief that on vintage non-master volume amplifiers, the distortion and overdrive characteristics that we know and love come from the distortion of the power amp sections as the amp's volume controls are cranked up to the maximum limit of what they can do. On the other hand are people who call this guitar forum snake oil bullshit and say that the amp gets its gain from the preamp section, because on these vintage non-master volume circuits, the volume control is the gain control, and that as that knob is increased, the signal going into the preamp with the increase of that volume knob push the preamp into saturation as that signal crosses the clipping threshold of the tubes. For instance, a common mod on a plexi is to add a master volume in there. The preamp still saturates when you push that volume up, and it doesn't blow your face off from the sheer power produced by those cranked up EL34s. This all leaves us with the question of, is the sound the same on those master volume modded plexis and AC30s before that volume gets cranked? Does it get dirtier, more spitty, and more compressed as the master volume goes up as well? The most effective way to test this would be to take a tube amp with a clean preamp and a master volume and see what happens as the channel volume and master volumes are pushed up to their max. Today, that is exactly what we're going to do. We'll take my freshly retubed and rebiased with a set of EL34 power tubes PVJSX. We're going to run it on 60 watt mode and pipe that into my reactive load box and see where the truth lies in this legend of power amp distortion. Let's go. All right, so we're going to hop over here to the audio example portion of this video. And the very first thing that I want to show you all, I've got this really strong guitar DI picked out here, and this is just a DI that was captured through my 85. It's this track right here, and you can see that the output here is set to RMP out, which that's my reamp box. So here is our track for output 3, which is my RMP out. So this is a meter for the actual physical output on my interface that feeds my reamp box, which I've got just a guitar cable going from my reamp box into my PVJSX. And as you can see here, I'm on the clean channel. I don't know how well you can see these knobs. They're kind of tough to see. I've got the volume knob here set at noon on this clean channel. The EQ is all set at noon, and the master volume is also set at noon. Before I jump into these audio examples, I just want to hit play here. I have the amp bypass, so there's nothing coming back in. This track here is where it will come back in. This is the captor input, which that's going to input 1 on my interface, and the only thing I've got going here is just a cab sim plugin. It's Fractal Audio's good stuff here. ML Sound Lab IR of a Zilla 2x12. Yay. But what's important here is you can see that this is not clipping on the track, this DI, and it's not clipping on the output. I have the output getting as close to 0 as I can get it without it clipping here. It's a pretty heavy picked guitar part. And yeah, you can hear what that sounds like. That signal itself isn't clipping. But the reason I selected such a hard picked heavy guitar part is because that is going to smack the preamp section of this amp hard. So if it is the preamp that's breaking up, we're going to get that as we increase the channel volume on this amp, because this knob here will be the preamp gain and the master volume will be the signal that's being fed to the master section, the output section of the amplifier, and that will be where the power tube distortion happens, if it does. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've got everything routed out here. See if we can hear this. Oh, amp's still in standby. Better kick that on. All right, so I've got the amp kicked on now, and we'll hear just this going into this. This is the clean channel in the amp. We'll see how clean it is and what happens. That's a pretty clean guitar tone. And I'm going to watch my input gain here. This channel here is showing me like where my input's hitting. And I'm going to try to keep this around -3 because we, as humans, we have subconscious bias. If we hear something that sounds louder, we're going to think it's more intense or whatever. So I'm going to try to keep that the same. That way we can objectively hear any kind of saturation that's happening in our guitar sound as we push up the channel volume, which we're going to go through the volume on the channel now. It's not so clean anymore. It's starting to break up, and I've got this volume knob max, but you can hear it starts to break up there. Yeah, you can hear it definitely gets distorted. Okay, so I'm gonna put that back at noon now, and now I'll play with the master volume and see what happens. All right. So I mean, as you could hear, I think it did break up as the master volume got pushed to its max. All right, so it does break up a little bit, okay? So this is the part of this video where I'm about to have to eat my words because I was 100% in the camp of power amp distortion is snake oil bullshit. And as we just saw here, the power amp does distort slightly. Is it much? No. No, it's not much at all. But I'd be hard pressed to say it's not there a little bit. So now I'm just going to kind of go nuts. I'm going to crank both knobs all the way up, and then we'll see what happens. I'm going to start with the preamp gain, which would be the volume knob on the clean channel. All right, so there's that preamp saturation that we heard. And now I'm going to crank up the master volume. And I think this is where shit might get kind of interesting. Right now I have the master volume set at about 4, and you can hear that. It is saturated from this preamp volume being pushed. It is saturated. And if I turn that gain here back up to halfway, so noon. As you push that up, it saturates. I'll put it at noon, push the master volume up. It saturates a little bit. Push them both up. That's a very different sound, and it's not just because it's louder. It's because the overall saturation characteristic and the distortion characteristic that's going on in that amplifier, it does change as the master volume is increased. So, I mean, if we're thinking about a vintage amp having its gain knob here, so which, you know, so we can pretend that this is a non-master volume amp by cranking that master volume all the way up, just forgetting about it, and then using the volume on the channel to up the gain or lower the gain. So that's what I'm doing now. I've got the master volume cranked. It's all the way up. And I have the channel volume at about 4. And we're just going to roll through the play of that and see what happens. That is a lot hairier and a lot more aggro of a sound than what you get if you take this master volume, say, to around 7, which is what I would consider to be the sweet spot on this amp. I've used this amp a lot and I know it well. All right, so I mean, yeah, I think what we've kind of shown here is that power tube distortion is a thing, and now I kind of just want to get a bit wild with this and try this on a distortion channel with an overdrive pedal in front of this amp to run it as God intended. All right, so now I've gotten my overdrive pedal patched in. I'm gonna roll with the Horizon Devices Precision Drive. I really like this pedal a lot. And I'm just gonna run it with your basic kind of like deathcore, death metal setting. I've got the attack knob down at 0, so it's still letting through a good bit of the low end. I've got the volume on it cranked. I have the drive set to nothing, and I have the bright knob set just at noon. So over to, I'm just gonna go use the Ultra channel of this amp, and I'm gonna start with the master volume at around 7, which is what I would consider to be the sweet spot on this dude. Around 7, the power section really opens up. It starts to compress a little bit. It's not really distorting yet, but it is starting to sag a little bit and add a little bit to that tone. And I'm gonna kick this drive on. I'm gonna set the gain here at about 3, and then I've got the channel volume cranked, so I'm gonna play with the master volume, and we'll see how the sound changes as I up or down the master volume, and then we'll crank the master volume and then play with the channel volume a little bit. right, so there you can hear the character of the amp changes a lot as the master volume goes up or down, which that's a really, that's a very well-known thing about tube amps is the sound definitely changes. Things get more compressed, things get a little more squishy and hairy as you get that master volume up towards its upper reaches. All right, everyone, there we have it. The sound of guitar distortion is much more complex than solely a preamp or a power amp distorting. It's a synergy of all the parts of an amplifier working as one and altering the sound in a particular way when things are pushed to their limits. We're talking about imperfect and old circuit designs. They just do funky shit. I think the core takeaway from this would be that when it comes to tone or really anything, our internal biases and things we believe because we've seen or heard them a lot can be misleading and outright wrong. It's important to experiment and find what works for you. I did this test myself yesterday and I realized how wrong I was, and that a power amp definitely does distort a little bit when pushed. I thought there was a lot of wisdom to be had in sharing that. Now let's go have some more intelligent gear discussions. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great week. And comment, like, and subscribe if you're still watching. Yay.